My name is Colonel Marcus Steele. What I'm about to tell you should have remained classified until 2087, but in exactly 23 minutes, Operation Black Pit will either save humanity or destroy it. Someone needs to know the truth about what we found in that Nevada desert. 6 months ago, seismic stations detected an anomaly unlike anything in history. Not an earthquake, not a nuclear test. Something our instruments could only describe as a localized distortion in space-time itself. The epicenter was 200 miles north of Las Vegas. The first reconnaissance team found a perfectly circular crater, 500 meters in diameter, descending into the earth at an impossible angle. The walls weren't rock or soil. They were something that absorbed light, sound, and electromagnetic radiation completely. Pure void. We called it the Black Pit. Here's the impossible part. According to geological surveys, the crater had been there for thousands of years. Desert flora had grown around its edges. Wind erosion patterns suggested centuries of exposure. Yet satellite imagery from 1 week earlier showed nothing but flat desert. The pit had somehow always existed and never existed simultaneously. The Pentagon classified the site immediately. Operation Black Pit was born. They brought in the best minds from MISTY, CERN, NASA. Dr. Elizabeth Harper, our lead physicist, had worked on theoretical models of temporal mechanics that most scientists considered pure fantasy. When we lowered our first probe into the pit, something extraordinary happened. The deeper it went, the slower its telemetry signals became. Delayed by distance. Slowed down as if time itself was moving differently inside the crater. At 200 meters depth, 1 second of probe time equaled 10 seconds on the surface. At 500 meters, the ratio was 1 to 60. Dr. Harper was ecstatic. She claimed we had discovered a natural time dilation field, a phenomenon Einstein had predicted but never observed. But I was military, not scientific. My instinct screamed that we were dealing with something far more dangerous. The breakthrough came when we sent down our first manned expedition. Lieutenant Sarah Chen volunteered, despite knowing she would experience severe time distortion. From her perspective, the descent would take minutes. From ours, we would watch her disappear into slow motion for hours. What she found at the bottom changed everything we thought we knew about reality. The pit wasn't natural, was a shaft, perfectly engineered, leading to a vast underground chamber that existed in what Chen described as temporal flux. The walls were covered in machinery that defied description. Not built by human hands, but not entirely alien either. The technology was familiar yet impossibly advanced. And there were bodies. Hundreds of them, perfectly preserved in crystal coffins. But here's what made my blood run cold. They were human, not primitive humans, not evolved humans. People who looked exactly like us, wearing military uniforms that resembled our own, but with subtle differences. Insignia I didn't recognize. Technology clearly more advanced than ours, but recognizably terrestrial. Chen's final transmission before we lost contact was barely coherent. Colonel, you need to understand what this place is. It's not just a time distortion. It's a temporal. Yet these people, they're us. From a future that somehow collapsed back into our past. The machinery, the bodies, everything here. It's the remnants of a timeline that never was. We waited 72 hours for Chen to emerge. When she finally climbed out, she had aged only 6 hours while we had experienced 3 full days. But she carried something that would shake the foundations of military intelligence worldwide. A data crystal containing information that shouldn't exist. The crystal held detailed records of events that hadn't happened yet. Wars beginning in 2031. Scientific breakthroughs scheduled for 2045. Political upheavals reshaping the world in 2063. But more terrifying were the records of Operation Black Pit itself, documenting our mission in perfect detail, including conversations that had occurred only hours earlier. Dr. Harper's analysis revealed the impossible truth. The pit was a temporal collapse point, a place where a future timeline had folded back on itself, creating a paradox that existed outside normal space-time. The future humans had discovered time travel, but their experiments created a catastrophic feedback loop that erased their entire timeline from existence, except for this one point. Crater where their timeline collapsed into ours, carrying with it memories and technology of a future that would now never exist. We were looking at archaeological remains of our own descendants, preserved in temporal amber that defied every law of physics. The data crystal contained warnings, multiple warnings from different iterations of the same experiments. Each time, future researchers had discovered the temporal collapse, tried to prevent it, only succeeded in creating a more complex paradox. They had been trapped in a causal loop, doomed to repeat their mistakes across multiple timelines. But the final entry was different. Written by someone calling himself Colonel Marcus Steele, from timeline designation Omega 7, addressed directly to me. Marcus, if you're reading this, then the loop is still active. You have one chance to break the cycle.
Okay.
But it requires a sacrifice that I couldn't make in my timeline. The choice you make in the next hour will determine whether humanity has a future at all. That's when I realize the true horror. I wasn't the first Marcus Steele to discover the Black Pit. I was perhaps the 100th, maybe the 1000th. Version of me had made different choices, created different outcomes, but somehow the loop always reset, always brought us back to this moment of decision. The crystal contained detailed instructions for the temporal reset protocol. By overloading the machinery in the pit with a precisely calculated electromagnetic pulse, we could collapse the entire temporal anomaly. The future timeline would be completely erased, along with all its knowledge and technology. But the paradox would end. Our timeline would continue naturally, free from the influence of collapsed futures. The alternative was to do nothing. Let the pit remain, study its secrets, potentially gain access to centuries of advanced technology and knowledge. but the warnings were clear. Every timeline that chose this path eventually suffered the same temporal collapse that created the pit. We would become the future civilization whose timeline folded back into the past. Trapped forever in this causal loop, I had to make the decision alone. The weight of not just our timeline, but potentially countless alternate versions of humanity rested on my choice. Study the pit and risk temporal collapse, or destroy it and lose access to unimaginable knowledge. As I record this message, my team is preparing the electromagnetic pulse that will either save or damn us all. In 18 minutes, we'll find out if this timeline is different. Make the choice that my predecessors couldn't. The data crystal contained one final message that has haunted me. It was from Dr. Elizabeth Harper of Timeline Omega 7. The pit doesn't just show us possible futures, it creates them. Every choice we make splits the timeline again. Somewhere, in another version of reality, every possible decision is being made. Simultaneously, we're not trying to save our timeline. We're trying to save all of them. I understand now why previous versions of myself hesitated. How do you choose to destroy knowledge that could advance humanity by centuries? How do you willingly embrace ignorance when enlightenment is within reach? But I also understand what they failed to grasp. Some knowledge comes at too high a price that the electromagnetic pulse is charging. My finger is on the trigger that will collapse the black pit forever. If you're hearing this recording, it means I made my choice. Whether it was the right choice, only time will tell. And time is far more fragile than any of us ever imagined. In 10 minutes, Operation Black Pit will end. The temporal anomaly will collapse. The future timeline will be erased. Humanity will continue forward into an uncertain but natural future. We'll never know what we might have learned from those crystal coffins. What technologies we might have developed. What warnings we might have heeded. But we'll be free. Free from the causal loop that has trapped countless versions of ourselves across multiple timelines. Free to make our own mistakes, to create our own future, to succeed or fail. On our own terms. My name is Colonel Marcus Steele. I'm about to make the hardest decision in human history. If I'm wrong, if the collapse creates an even worse paradox, then I apologize to every version of humanity that will never exist because of my choice. But if I'm right, if breaking the loop allows our timeline to continue naturally, then remember this moment. Remember that sometimes the greatest victory is choosing not to win. That sometimes wisdom means accepting ignorance, and that the future should belong to those who live to see it, not to the echoes of those who never were. Operation Black Pit ends now. The time rift closes forever. Humanity steps forward into tomorrow, blind but free. 10 seconds to pulse. Activation. 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Initiating temporal collapse. May God forgive us all.